Hello, and welcome to Chasing Self Actualization. My name is Marisol Sanchez.
I'm Janaiah von Hassel.
I am not self-actualized. You?
I am. No, I'm kidding. I am definitely on this journey with you of always expanding and leaning further into all that I can be. So
We've had a few episodes launch, and I got some feedback that my hands are just, when I use my hands, it's distracting. So trying to.
Did you? Okay, I didn't get any feedback like that because when I posted it, I said compliments only.
Well, I have a little, like I told you, I have a little market research group. I asked for the...
Which is so healthy. Say, like, could I get some feedback either way so I can improve? And meanwhile, I'm like, positive only, thanks.
No, that's it. I asked for the evaluation. I asked for the, how can I improve? How can you improve? How can the production improve? And we got notes. Not many, though. I mean, I would say 95% of my feedback has been overjoyously positive. It's been...
That's really awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm excited about today's episode because this was actually something we met only a few months ago. And most of the time we've been talking about the production of this, getting guests on, and all things related to the podcast. And I still feel like I know so little about you. And you're so very fascinating and interesting. And I really do believe this. Like, you are very interesting and fascinating. And these when I was listening back to podcasts, some of your questions are so deep. And I've just been looking forward to. So this episode, we are the guest, yes. And we are going to interview each other. And I have been waiting for this because I'm just very curious to know more about your background. And I've started to put this puzzle together just from little things you've said. But I'm looking forward to just hearing more. Who is Marisol Sanchez, and why did you want to go on this journey of creating this podcast?
Be careful what you wish for. Thank you for being vaguely interested in anything about me. It's still shocking that anyone would want to know more about me, but I'm an open book, and ask away. What would you like to know?
Let's start at the very beginning. So I've pieced together that you grew up in the Catholic Church, and then you, that kind of, it sounds like that sort of moved you into atheism. So, and then into your spirituality that you are growing today. So I would love to hear, your takeaway as a young person in the church, and without having to feel like you need to create disclaimers. I know people who are in the Catholic Church that are fed through the Catholic Church and have healthy relationships with, their creator through that. And I know people who don't. So this is just your perception of how you perceive things.
Thank you for that.
So,
yes.
yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Because I definitely have a lot of disclaimers. So I was born Catholic, and that's a distinction, because if you're born into the Catholic Church, I feel very strongly that it becomes a part of you. That 0 to 6 age, you download,
mm-hmm.
and
right.
And so being born into the Catholic Church, I'm Catholic. I still consider myself Catholic, and a lot of my current practices stem from Catholic teachings. But yes, I'm going to try to do this as a highlight reel and not, so please pull me back if it gets boring. But and if to the audience, I've gotten notes in the past that when I tell this story, I might laugh at an inappropriate time. It's trauma. So I'm not trying to make light of situations. But my mother, it starts with my mother and my father. They were immigrants. My mother probably had a grade school education. Father as well. Both came to the United States. My mom from Honduras. She was one of 12.
And are they still with you today?
Yeah, they've both
passed.
Rest in peace, have passed. Both Catholic, my father from Spain, my mom from Honduras. My dad came when he was 15. So that's the genesis of me. When I was 9, my brother tragically passed away. He was 18 years older than I was, and I was the only girl, 3 older brothers. And my mom, at this point, I was living with my mom. My parents had separated. And watching any mother lose their child is not natural. And watching your own mother go through that is horrific for anyone. And she was searching, as I imagine any mother might at that point. Where's my son? What happened to him? And she didn't find solace or balm in the Catholic Church, and she left. She was the first in her family, I think, to do so, which is a big deal. Like, I have some members of my family who put the picture of the Pope outside the door. Like,
Yep.
there's a spectrum of Catholicism.
Right. Yeah.
My family ran that gamut.
Yeah.
So when my mom was searching, I got dragged along. Pentecostal. Any Reformation church, I probably visited it for a very long time. Jehovah's Witness, tarot card readers, psychics. My mom was just searching. She was searching for what happened to my brother? Where's his soul? What happened? So in those experiences, I'm just a little kid.
Yeah.
And I'm just observing and observing and observing. And by the time I was 15, my mom then baptized herself as a Southern Baptist. And I became an atheist. And this is in the 80s. So this is not like today where,
It was before it was cool.
Before you would say atheist and people would literally have a physical reaction to you. I remember after having my children saying I was an atheist, and my twins' godmother was like, can you soften it up a little? Can you maybe say agnostic? Like, it was not comfortable or normal. But I was really anchored into my atheism.
Actually, I would love to hear. So an atheist believes there is no God. This is the core of atheism. So, kind of walk me through this. So, can you still experience like faith and gratitude? You're just having it towards things that are more tangible?
Well, I was 15, so I don't want to speak for, atheism, the practice. I remember being in church.
I guess what I'm asking, was it is this an angry feeling?
Yes.
Okay, so this is not, because almost as I'm hearing your story, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, but it's you don't exist because I'm mad. Is this it, sort of?
I was in church, and this particular denomination, it was like 2 hours of Bible study on Sunday. Then we would have a little break, and then we'd go into what felt like 4 hours of church. And two incidents happened. One, we lined up for a picture, and the son of the preacher, who was in his 30s, I was younger, put his hand inappropriately on me while the picture was being taken. Now, that's not assault. It's not, but that moment I didn't feel God. Mm-hmm. I felt a nasty old man's hand on my ass, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And that coupled with judgment. I just judged everyone, including my mom. Like, I was like, what is, I don't see God in any of this.
Yeah.
And so it was anger. I was angry. I was very angry. Not, probably my home life more than anything, probably my circumstances more than anything. But I was angry. And I had always probably been angry with God. In fact, something I'd written in the past, I said, I've been fighting with God since I was born. And I remember when I was a little girl asking my mom, do you love me? Like, more than, I think I said, do you love me, or do you love me more than anyone? Or something that a little kid would ask. And my mom was like, no, God first, which I understand now as an adult, but as a little girl.
Yeah.
Still working on healing a lot. So that's where I think my atheism, that coupled with politics, honestly. I was very plugged into the politics, not just in the United States, but kind of around the world because of my Latin heritage. And I saw the combination of those two things as just a natural evolution to believing in nothing, because Nothing that I saw seemed loving, kind, or anything that I believe Jesus, or what I understood Jesus to have said.
So when does this start to shift for you? So
that was 15, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking 40s. So my children were born and raised as non-believers, which, if you know anything about the Catholic faith, is a big deal. I'll be asked, are they baptized? No. That's, clutch my pearls. And it was intentional when I raised my kids that I wanted the opposite of what I had experienced. So it was, that's what happened. And then one of the big defining moments of my life was a divorce. I had 3 children, and my father was passed away, and my mother was maybe in her latter years. She had dementia, so I didn't feel like I had any support. I mean, I had wonderful support from my friends, but my friends can't make the decision for me about divorce. My friends can't make a decision about which lawyer to hire, fight this, not fight, So I was kind of alone. I felt very alone, like from a parental perspective. And I started praying. It was, I got on my knees. It had been a long, long time. And that, coupled with starting a yoga practice and just inviting prayer into my life in little ways, opened me up. And then I started deep diving. And I went from being completely closed and angry to everything's true. If you believe you're speaking to God through this or that or the other, that's true. So who am I to question, judge, or ask anyone else to believe what I believe?
Was there like a overnight awakening or experience or was this just like you begin to chip away and something began to emerge? Was this sort of like over a period of time, or do you have a defining moment?
Well, it all, relating it back to Maslow's theory, I spent a lot of time in the security of the last rung, like never feeling safe, never feeling secure. And after my divorce, that's what I was needing to heal. That's what I needed to do. And so it started in little ways. It started with, this posture in yoga. And one of our guests coming up, we're going to talk about it. I used to study Ashtanga yoga, which is a very, I don't want to use the word devout, but it's a very stringent practice. It's every day, an hour and a half on the mat, same set sequence, it's a meditative practice, and it breaks you down spiritually, emotionally, physically. And that's really, I think, the genesis was like I started to feel something spiritual, and then I felt totally into it. I was, this was my personality. Ashtanga yoga was me. And then I traveled, to meet people who were in this practice who were, they use the word gurus. And then I went to India for a month, and that was it was a big moment in my life. That was another moment where I was like, okay, yeah, I knew God existed. I knew I had kind of a breakdown when I was in India, and we stayed with monks. We were with a guru, and it was a community of people. And that's probably where my meditation practice came in. But what was interesting was, and this is a common theme in all my looking for a religion or looking for a home, is as soon as the leaders do something that I feel questionable about, I'm out. Like I have such a too high, because humans aren't perfect, and I need to accept that. But if you were a leader of an organization, I hold you to a higher standard. I hold you as the role model. So go back to Catholicism. In this angry state that I was in, I became anti-Catholic when the church had a lot of the crimes that were committed against children. come out, I was number one, angry person. I had a Google alert,
Yeah.
every day. Like, I struggle with this hate that I had in my heart. And it was there for a really long time, specifically to the Catholic Church. Like, it was insane. Then something magical happened. Well, my mom died. That's not the magical thing. That wasn't the magical thing. But when my mom died, she passed away. I was in Florida with her. And I connected with a longtime mentor of mine. And he said, hey, come work for me. Come. I was very discombobulated. Come work at this company. It was a company based out of Mexico. And I didn't think much of it. Hadn't heard the name before. And I went to work there. And now, looking back, I worked there for, I think, 5-6 years. The founder is one of the two people I mentioned to you that I think I've been in a room with, and I'm like, they're pretty damn self-actualized. Mm-hmm. That he's one of them, and he's Catholic.
Right.
Poosh!
Yeah.
And so the first time I heard him speak, so I didn't know this. I knew I was going into a corporate job. That was my vision. And in my corporate world, you don't talk religion or politics. So I just joined the company. I hear the founder speak. I physically feel my heart opening. And mystical things started kind of happening in my life. And long and the short of it is I fell in love with myself again. And it became when I fell in love with Catholicism again. And relating it to Maslow's theory, I think, self-love and self-esteem are in that rung where I feel that I'm working on. What I realized, the divine timing, was showing up and working at that job healed me and my Catholicism. By hating them, I hated myself. Because 0 to 6, that's what I believe. Like, every morning I wake up and do a rosary. That's my meditation. I pray to the Virgin Mary. That's a really important relationship in my life. So accepting Catholicism, understanding that I have to heal that wound to learn to like and love myself. So it's like I had to go full circle. And it was this crazy moment because I don't know what you know about Catholicism, but you have to confess to a priest. And I hadn't confessed for 30 years. And another thing about Catholicism is they want you back home badly.
Yeah.
So my confession was like something quite a few priests had been after for a long time. And it was because of this company. They had sent me on a pilgrimage in Cuatro Ciénegas, Mexico. It's called St. Joseph's Pilgrimage. And I met the best people, all of them Catholic, all praying for me, all praying for my family. And it was just this beautiful healing experience. And I fell in love again with certain aspects of Catholicism. And thus, again, falling in love with myself and, accepting myself as a Catholic. And it's still weird. I don't go to church on Sunday. I will go to church if I feel a need to. Mm-hmm. I don't confess. Anyone here in Wilmington, there are some other priests that I have a relationship with. But according to the Catholic Church, I'm not in good standing.
Are you in good standing with yourself?
Yes.
And according to your connection to the
absolutely.
Catholic Church?
Yes. And the anger still rises up. If something comes up, sometimes the Pope will come out and say something. Like, I heard something he said about hell, and he had not a new definition. I don't want to misspeak, but he basically was kind of saying, like, hell's not real. That's the way I read what he said. Mm-hmm. And I was pissed off for like a week because as a little girl, that's all I believed. I believed I was going to hell. I was a sinner. I was a bad person. All these layers of self-doubt and self-hate came from how I downloaded the messages as a little girl.
Yeah.
So then...
So it's like you guys couldn't have connected these dots 50 years ago.
And plus, I deep dive into things. So when, and with technology, as the internet came about in my life, and I could do research, and I used to have a 28-minute speech on the crimes the Catholic Church committed against humanity. Like, I was that angry. So for me, the biggest, healing has come in. I don't know how to define it, because I consider myself Catholic. I don't know if the Catholic Church does.
Yeah.
I'm not practicing, but that's where, my practices kind of stem from. And I take what I want, and what I don't agree with, I don't take. There's the Apostles' Creed. Mm-hmm. In the Catholic faith, we say one true church. There's a line, one true church. I have not been able to say that since I was a little girl. Like, in my core, in my root chakra, there was this just knowledge that no, there's just infinite ways to God. And I still to this day believe that. So that's my story.
So that's your story. So when did you decide that you wanted to do the podcast? Has that been on your list for a long time, this podcast?
So I've been podcasting for a while, since 2014. And the name Chasing Self Actualization came up for me when I was on another podcast talking with a friend. Excuse me. And I said something about, chasing your self-actualization. And she's like, who does that? And this was years ago. This is probably maybe 8 years ago. And I remember because I always felt, and this might be from being an immigrant's child, I always felt like I didn't understand everything that was going around. Like I listened to Spanish news, and I grew up listening to American. So I always felt like I had to pay super attention to what was going on, be very aware of my surroundings. And yeah, what was the question? I'm sorry.
What was the question? When did you decide that you wanted to do this podcast?
Okay, so Chasing Self-Actualization, she said that, and I was like, oh, this isn't something people do. They don't, we learned about it in college, but it's not something we're supposed to pursue. And I just kind of put it back in my head. And then when I left that company that I was mentioning earlier, that's who I did a podcast for. That was my last podcast. And I knew I'd probably podcast again. I knew I had that plan. And this was the name. I knew the name years ago. I just didn't know who I'd be doing it with, or when, or how it all come to be.
From my standpoint, it was so interesting to meet you that day and have that come together so very quickly to do this podcast. And it is an eternal reminder for me that when things are in alignment, there's such ease and flow to their creation. And I've since used this story of how we connected to sort of reaffirm with myself that when something's meant for us, it's ours. We don't have to, come up with new tricks and ideas of how to lure it in or chase it down, because it was something that I started. I'd always kind of had the idea that it would be fun. Like, I've blogged a lot. When I was a kid, I was on a low-power television show actually called Young Disciples. So this was when I was 12, 13, around that time. And me and my siblings, we did puppet shows, and we had all these silly little songs and skits that we did. It was super fun. So I knew that something like this would be fun. I love to talk. So people would always say that, if only you could get paid for talking, which I've actually always done because I'm a recruiter. So I interview people for a living. Yeah. And, but so I had wanted to do this, but actually something that I haven't shared with too many people, but something that I feel led to share today because I think it's been so powerful for me. I actually met you on February 22nd. On February 6th, I had a miscarriage, and I was really broken up about it. And it was just one of the hardest things I've experienced in my life. And I was, in the short time that followed, because again, I only met you 2 weeks after that. So I was crying a lot. I was really struggling with how I would wrap my head around this and my faith around this and move forward. And I was having a moment where I was, I guess, like speaking with the baby. Now I'm going to get emotional.
Oh, no, please.
And I just was praying, wherever you are, you know, thank you for the time we had. So I'm in this moment, and it was a boy, and I get a sense from him, you know, I'm a blessing, I promise. And I was like, oh, okay. So from there, I get this sense it says, whatever seeds you plant in grief will grow. I'm giving you fertile soil. And I was like, but I just want you, you know. So at the time, I'm just like, but I knew this was so profound. So actually something that I started to journal about was a podcast where I would be able to share with people something that was empowering and uplifting, and to help people realize that this life is so precious and so beautiful, and that we can live it more fully. And it was something that I wanted for myself too. So fast forward very little, like this is a week after this moment that I have this inclination that, you know, the seeds planted in this will grow. And I said, this is one of the seeds I'm planting among a couple other things. So I go speak downtown at an event. I'm doing about LinkedIn optimization, which is about for my recruiting job. And lo and behold, you were there. And the crazy thing about that day that I just can't get out of my head is I have these little prayer rocks. So if I'm praying for my company, I have a rock for Winnow Services. If I'm praying for my kids, I have a prayer rock for that. And I just imagine that all the prayers kind of get recorded in this rock, and God can like upload them when he's not too busy. It's just a crazy kind
of neat
thing.
It works for you. My husband does the same thing.
It's my prayer rock. So I had a podcast prayer rock, and I'm leaving that day, and I'm like, grab the podcast prayer rock. And I was like, well, this is about my company. I should get that rock. But I was like, no, get the podcast one. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I grab my podcast prayer rock, I stick it in my pocket, and off I go. I do my little presentation, and then I sit down next to you.
Well, and this is a mystical moment for me, because I was leaving to that networking event, and right before I left, so I'm really working hard on trying to understand when I get a message, is that the discernment, trying to practice discernment, like, am I crazy, or are you really saying to do this? So right before I was leaving for that networking event, I felt very called to do a TikTok. Not something I like to do, people. And the whole TikTok was sort of like a CV of my podcasting experience, like all of the podcasts and how they all are kind of leading up to Chasing Self Actualization. And I had been looking, it was on my vision board, podcast host. I had asked people, didn't align, didn't work out. And I had just, like, I think maybe a few days before I met you, decided, well, I'm going to just do it alone, figure it out.
Yeah.
And I created the artwork, and I was moving forward. And before that networking event, I leave, and I'm like, why did you just record? Like, I felt really compelled to record this, like, here's my resume of podcasting. Go to the event. You're speaking. Then they ask us to go around and say, you know, what we're doing. And I say, I'm starting an event. And your eyes, like, you have very expressive, beautiful eyes. And they were like round saucers. Your eyes just got so, and you sat right next to me.
Yeah, that was when I strategically sat next to you, podcast stone on my left pocket, you sitting right next to it. And I was just like, there's got to be a connection here. I'm meant to meet this woman tonight.
And then as soon as you said podcast stone, I had the awareness of, like, that's why I had done the video. And I had said to you, go, you know, watch
hilariously
this.
That night, because there were other people coming over to talk to us. I think we spoke together for 10 minutes tops. Mm-hmm. And during that 10 minutes, you said, I wish I would have met you a little bit sooner. Mm-hmm. I would have asked you to be my co-host, or however you said it. And I was like, oh, did you find someone? And you said no. And I said, why don't you ask me now? Like, I was like, and we exchanged phone numbers. And I, when I got back to the car, I was like, I can't believe I showed her my podcast stone. In the first 10 minutes we met, she was going to think I'm nuts.
But that was to me what because I have stones, and my husband he's in sales. He has a stone, you know, I'm a big believer, like, whatever tools work for you, use
Yeah.
it. So to me, that was a sign of like, oh, this is alignment.
Yeah.
And what was funny was it was so easy for me to say yes, which is very not normal of me. I'm usually like, what's your background?
I'd never done a podcast before. I had no experience with this. And I think I text you, I said something like, don't add me to anything, because you already had all your stuff ready. And I was like, just like, why don't you try me out? And if it's a good match, and you were like, I'm going to add you to stuff. Like, it was so natural.
I just felt very, like, I had an awareness of you were absolutely it. And then there was a moment where I was like, doubt creeped in, like, well, you don't know anything about her. What if she, episode 4, admits to being, a child murderer? What the hell are you going to do?
That would be a really, really good episode, though.
But you know what I mean? Like,
not.
I didn't have, and it was just this awareness and calmness of not, like, trust. It was like trusting the universe. And I'm like, I asked for it. I got it. I received it. Thank you.
And that's the receiving too, right? So this has really become something for me that I'm like, it really only needs to be that simple. And I think even just to sit down next to you in that moment, to me, my mind was just like, why can't it be this simple? Why can't I just come here and meet somebody who's launching a podcast and ask me to be their co-host, and then we start the next week? Like, why not? And so, and I'm a very like, why not me, as opposed to like, why me? I'm just, if I just think like, why not? I love a good miracle. And the timing of this was so special to me because I've had a lot of gratitude. I've been able to recognize what grief is able to do for us. It's very grounding. And it's not preferred. And it's not the only way to ground, but it's very grounding, and it gives us a time to purge a lot of insecurity. It can. Mm-hmm. It can be multifaceted, and it depends on how we use it. But it can allow us to purge. It can allow us to shift into a place of being perceptive. And you're very familiar as well with grief, but it can put you in almost like a daze where your brain comes offline. And I do think it just sort of allows you to be more in spirit mode if you're able to receive that.
Yeah, I wonder if they've done any studies or measurement of people's brain waves during grief. Because it sounds like maybe we might be in a different wavelength, like
it's possible.
Because when you're saying it, I'm like, that sounds like truth to me. Like, so we now share a hairstylist that you recommended, and I just saw her recently, and we were talking about the podcast and you and stuff, and referencing your miscarriage. In conversation with her, I said something that the minute I said it didn't feel like words I would use, but then I felt like, and I said something else needed to be born, like, and my body was like, oh, that's like, oh, you can't say that about someone who miscarried, but then later I was like, I think it's something else.
So there's something about being receptive, and it's really difficult. I think grief sort of levels the playing field, and it allows you to grow a lot of things. And that can be bitterness, that can be anger, that can be a lot of different emotions can come up. And it becomes really important to be vigilant in weeding your garden at that time, because this is like the analogy that I've come up with. It's really difficult to say anything like that, like, oh, it's all for a reason, or to try to find a silver lining in that. And honestly, I don't. I can really be separate here and say, like, but I do believe that that all things can be used for good. And especially when we stay in faith, that there are good things in store for me, and that there is constant flow of abundance and opportunity, and what's meant for me is mine, and it's coming in, and we trust that what comes in is what's meant for us. And sometimes, and that's what surrender really is. It's trusting
and
that.
I find it to be hard. I find surrender, atonement, all these big spiritual ideas. Like, for years, I would hear the words, I'd read the definitions, but I didn't understand. I couldn't. What does that mean, surrender? Someone teach me to surrender. And then now I feel like I've had experiences when you just kind of let it go. Just, like one of our guests said, have that palm open for
you hold it with an open hand, which I'm always like, what does that mean? Yeah. But I think it's because we can dream and wish for everything. At the end of the day, what we're dreaming and wishing for is to feel fulfilled, to feel valuable, to feel there's all these feelings we're looking for. And so we dream to find it through this thing and through that thing. And if we can trust that God has a plan that's more magnificent than ours, like when you really trust that, you just act different every day. And in acting different things come in for you. I thought about canceling and not going to the event that day because I was not feeling great, you know? But I thought good things are coming in for me. And that was like the space that I was coming from, was that I was planting seeds in grief and good things were coming in for me, and it created different actions, and it allowed me to be receptive to this opportunity.
All right, your turn now.
Okay.
So I had this idea, Chasing Self Actualization. I've been on a self-help journey for 22 years. The second my children were born, I was like, oh, I guess I need to figure this shit out. I've tried everything, right? So this is normal for me. This is my life. I know it. But you came in, you wanted to do a podcast. You knew that. And I know that you wanted to do something that would help others. That was very, very clear. Me too. Check. How was it so easy to say, hey, come do this podcast about trying to help people chase their self-actualization? Like, you were so easy to...
Yeah, it felt right. And I'm a yes girl. I'll say that. Like, when something's like that, it felt mysterious to me. Like, I just felt like this is just too weird.
It was mystical.
Yeah.
Like, even how this all came in.
And again, you know, I got my podcast stone in my pocket. And you're like, you want to be, I mean, it just felt so on point. And also I think I actually scored 98% optimistic on a test before. So I'm a yes girl. I kind of feel like, yeah, let's see where this goes. I didn't really resonate with the title at first, to be honest. And I was like, how's this going to align with what I'm trying to do? And then I spent like almost no time on that thought. I'm like, it will. And it has. And it perfectly did. Okay. I just didn't see it that way, you know? So I was like, I want to do something that empowers other people to live, you know, an inspired life, which is exactly what this podcast does. And if I wrote out, like if I had brought my mission statement of what I wanted a podcast to do, it's entirely this. It just was that, you know, the terminology of self-actualization wasn't something that I used.
And it's not common. That's why I wanted it. Because I'm like, I felt like, you know, as a freshman in college, in a class with 300 people, we're all sitting here looking at this pyramid being taught about it, and that's the last I heard of it.
Yeah, I remember learning about it from Wayne Dyer a little bit, talking about it, and it was, you know, interesting for sure. And I think for me, outside of the podcast, it's not like something that I'm thinking about so much as I'm thinking, how can I fulfill purpose in this moment? And that's sort of how I, you know, when I'm on top, that's how I'm living my life. Whether I had the most amazing experience with a woman outside of a doctor's office, I was walking out of a restaurant, and I will say mantras and things about like, make me purposeful. So I'm like hugging this stranger as the moment, like, you know, first I held the door for her. She says, I'm not going in there. She starts talking about her son. She seems to be having a hard day. And I'm thinking like, shut up, you know? And then I go, this is how you be purposeful. And these are the things I remind myself like every day. I feel like whether it's self-actualization or being aligned with our highest self, like in the moments where we are meeting the needs of another person, we are self-actualized, we are purposeful, we are aligned with our higher selves. So for me, it's a moment-to-moment thing, and I seek for that to be the default, that I don't have to remind myself so much to be a good person, that it comes more naturally every day. Yeah. And that's kind of how I think of it. In the morning, if my son and I are going out to see what flowers bloomed, like for me, those are self-actualized moments, because I just feel like they're so pure and they're so precious. And when we get busy with life, we forget that that's what it is. It's like, this happened like 2 years ago. I looked outside and a flower that had been closed up for a long time opened, and I thought nothing of it for a second, and then I thought, what if that was a big deal? What if I was like, wow, that flower opened. I've been curious what color it was. Yeah. And that's how I try to live my life more and more. And it just, when it becomes more habitual now, However, at the same token, when I'm not doing that, I feel the distance of it so much stronger that I'm just like, I feel that misalignment, and I'm almost like, I can't even go on with my day until I get back to right, you know?
Well, I think it's important. The title, what I like about it is I feel like it opens up this idea of, we're not talking about any particular religion. Everything's open to the door. But so for me, like going back to my journey, something you said reminds me of a prayer in the Course of Miracles. And in the book, it's I want to say it accurately, and I probably won't, but it's something like, God, where would you have me go? What would you have me say? Who would you have me see? Like, it's this idea planted in your head that you're going to be a vessel of God's. And in everything I've practiced or studied, or I'm not a subject matter expert, I'm always a student. Like, I might have a bunch of certifications, like I'm, certified to be a yoga teacher. I don't teach yoga. I did it to deepen my practice. Like, I'm always studying, and I'm always open now to anything. And in my studies, and if I got interested, I practiced, Course in Miracles for a year. I did the Tao for a year. Like, I want to learn from anything and everything. And because of my career, because of what I've learned, I've always learned to look for the patterns, to look for what is similar or different. And what I have discovered, is it's a lot of them have the same things, the same principles, the same understandings, and it's not as complicated as religions have made it out to be for me.
Right.
I'm speaking for myself. It's be nice, be kind, be open, love.
It's love. It's so simple. It's love, right?
Love.
And so for me, I think whether I'm saying purpose-filled, self-actualized, aligned with my higher self, all these words to me mean love. Mm-hmm. And I desire to feel more love every day. Yeah. I desire and when I was a little girl, I had I just was always very like goody two-shoe, but accidentally.
So me too.
I was homeschooled my whole life, so I didn't really know like anything outside of this, and I was just like fervently praying, like, I want a heart for God, I want to do good, and like this was just, and that song, Is It I, Lord? I Will Go. I've heard you calling in the night. It's this, I'm like 8 years old, like, I'll go, like, send me to where they're hurting and crying. And, so this was my heart growing up. And then, of course, life comes in like a storm, and everything was, I went through some really confusing years where that earnest, I never lost my faith in God, but I completely deconstructed what I understood of my religion, and I am non-denominational now, and I just have this immense faith in God, in love. Yeah. I just believe in love. I've seen what it can do, and the way that love fills me up is when I'm of service to others.
It's funny when you were speaking, because we're so opposites, similar in so many ways, but like you are very open, yes, and I'm more of like, prove it to me, because I don't believe you.
When we met, somebody recently was like, you guys are what did she say, like a surprising duo combo, or something. Yeah, which I thought was interesting, and I did want to share that the feedback I was getting from people was, what a great match, because some of my more optimistic, bright side friends really resonated with some of the ways that I received some of whatever our guests said, which I will just say that I'm easily inspired, but I'm easily everything. I'm easily discouraged, I'm just I sway. And then I got calls from people who had never met you. Friends of mine were like, oh my gosh, I really resonated with Marisol. And somebody said, no offense, but you've always been a little, she's, high in the sky. And she's like, but, Marisol's more how I feel. Like I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah. So one of our interviews, you said to me, like, I don't see you as angry. And what I love about meeting you at this point in my life is you're meeting me today. My version of who I am today. Not the same person 5 years ago, not the same person 10 years ago, certainly not the same person 20 years ago. And so I love that because I don't think I come off as angry or, but hateful. But I was hateful for most of my life. And I couldn't understand. Everyone disappointed me. Every religious leader, disappointed me in many, many ways. And I never saw God through an organization. The times I've experienced it, I've been by myself. I've been in a small group of people. I have experienced it in church, but I mostly experience it on my own. And I'm okay with that. I'm 50. My youngest just graduated high school. No one can tell me anything right now. I'm really confident in my spirituality, but it's so unique to me, right? Yeah. No one's going to light 2 Catholic candles in the morning, read A Course in Miracles, and then, maybe go look at some Ayurvedic philosophy about what I'm feeling physically. Like I'm so unique to my experiences. So to me, I just want to help anyone who wants to connect to a higher power to start a spiritual practice. I'm open to helping anyone figure out a path that is unique to them. I'm not an expert. I'm not saying any organization is the right one. In fact, I'm probably very dismissive of any organized religion, in general. So.
Well, I really hope with this podcast, or I've already seen, people come from all different walks. And when we call people to be on the podcast, we have no idea what their political affiliation is, what their religious affiliation is. It's just, we're seeing something that we know that people can benefit from learning, what practices they're using. And as we continue and we present hundreds of blueprints to people, that's my prayer, you're going to put together what works for you. And it's going to be unique to every person. And I've deconstructed so much of what I learned growing up and created something that supports me now. Yeah. And that comes through a personal relationship with, spirit, with love, with God, or however you understand this force that we are all connected by, that we feel when we're in alignment with it and we feel when we aren't.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not... one thing about doing something like this, I feel puts us, like, who does she think she is? Or am I, if someone catches me, drinking tequila shots and smoking a blunt, are they going to be like, like everything we've done is not worthy or counted? No, I'm telling you right now, I am so imperfect. I have many friends who can attest to this. I am chasing my self-actualization every single day. And it's a chase. It's for me. And I am fallible every single day. And I wholly admit it and own it. So I don't want anyone to think that we're posturing as examples of self-actualized people. I just want to be in the room with people who are chasing it. And I am, because I feel that with you.
Yeah. No, and I'm just welcoming, expansion and more love into my life. And I think we spend so much of our lives looking in the mirror, not liking what we see. We know what our flaws are. We go to bed at night with that tape recorder playing of every imperfection. And I'm just at a place in my life where, despite that, even still, I'm ready to just be all that I can be, show up as the best version of myself, and say to myself and everyone, it's not perfect, it's enough. And that's where I'm at.
And that's where our podcast is at.
It's enough.
It's enough. Well, thank you so much for another great interview, and I will see you next time.
See you next time.
And that is another episode of Chasing Self Actualization. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us for more information.
And to learn more about our guest or what we're doing next, you can check out our website at ChasingSelfActualization.com.